"Name your figure," the lawyer said, and laid an envelope on the brass rail of the King's Guard gate as if he were tipping a porter. "Whatever it is, double it. All I need is one sentence from you in that hearing. You did not see what you think you saw." I was 3 feet from Tomas Farron when the man said it, close enough to hear the paper hiss against the metal, and watch my friend's gloved hand stay exactly where it was. "I am Corporal Devlin Marsh, 2nd section of the gate watch at the Westmark Lodge, and I had stood beside Tomas through 9 winters and a great many fools, but I had never seen a man try to buy a sentry the way you buy a horse." The lawyer was smooth as a river stone, gray suit, no creases, a watch that cost more than my year. He smiled at Tomas the way a man smiles at a lock he is certain he has the key for. Tomas did not smile back. He did not look down at the envelope. He looked, as he always looked, straight ahead at the empty middle distance over the cobbled forecourt, his face the still, weathered face of a man who has decided in advance that nothing said to him will move him a degree. The envelope sat on the rail between them like a thing already refused. "He cannot speak to you," I said, stepping a half-pace forward. "He is on duty. If you have business, take it to the lodge office." The lawyer turned his smile on me without hurry. "And you are?" "Corporal of the watch. Take your envelope and step back from the King's Guard." He did not step back. He did not pick the envelope up either, which told me he wanted it seen, wanted Tomas to know exactly what shape the offer took. "I represent a man of considerable standing," he said pleasantly. "There has been an unfortunate misunderstanding about something a guardsman believes he witnessed last Thursday evening at the river steps. My client would prefer the matter resolved without anyone's memory being put under more strain than it can bear." He let that hang. "Memory is a fragile thing, Corporal. It would be a shame to ruin a good career, insisting on a version of an evening that a tired man, at the end of a long watch in poor light, cannot truly be sure of." I felt the cold come up the back of my neck. Because the moment he said the river steps and last Thursday, I knew exactly what this was, and I knew what Tomas had seen. Tomas Farron was the kind of sentry who notices. There are guardsmen who let the world wash past them like weather, and guardsmen who miss nothing, the second kind rarer and worth 10 of the first. In 19 years on the Westmark gates, he had grown a habit of seeing he could no more switch off than a man can switch off his own pulse. The river steps were a quiet post at the bottom of the lodge grounds where the old wall came down to the water, worn stone stairs, an iron lamp, a stretch of embankment walk almost no one used after dark. We posted a single sentry there on the late relief, mostly for form's sake, and that Thursday it had fallen to Tomas. He told me about it later, in the flat plain way he told everything. The night had been clear and cold with a half-moon, and the lamp at the steps threw enough light to read a face by within 10 yards. A little before midnight, 2 men came down onto the embankment from the lane along the upper wall. They had not seen Tomas at first, because a sentry in the dark by the wall is the most invisible man in the city, and they argued in low, fast voices at the edge of the water. Tomas could not hear all of it. He heard enough. He heard the smaller man in a pale coat say a name and a figure and the words, "You promised me it was clean." He heard the larger man, heavy-shouldered and well-dressed, answer in a voice used to being final, "It is clean when I say it is clean and not before." He saw the larger man take a leather case from the smaller one, money in it banded and bricked, and heard the smaller man say, "But the books, what about the books?" and saw the larger man take a slim folder from his own coat, tear it once across, and drop the halves into the river. And then the smaller man said something Tomas could not catch and turned to go, and the larger man caught him by the collar and struck him, once, hard, against the iron rail of the steps, and the small man went down and did not at once get up. Tomas moved then. He was a sentry, not a statue, whatever the tourists believe. The law that holds a king's guard at his post does not hold him while a man is being beaten 10 yards from his boots. He came off the wall and called out, and the large man turned, saw the red tunic and bearskin come out of the dark like something the night had grown, and ran gone before Tomas reached the foot of the steps. Tomas did not chase him. He knelt by the small man instead, bleeding from the scalp and frightened half out of his wits, got him sitting up against the rail and blew 3 short blasts on the watch whistle. That is how I came to be running down the river steps at 1 minute, past midnight, with 2 of the section behind me. We got the small man warm, and the surgeon said it was not so bad as the blood made it look. He would not give his name at first. He sat shaking with a blanket round his shoulders, eyes going to the door every time it opened, and it took the better part of an hour and a great deal of patience from Tomas before he told us. His name was Peter Vane. He kept the books for a shipping concern on the wharves, the Calder line, and the man who had struck him was Aldous Calder himself, who owned it, and was, Vane whispered, a far worse man than the wharves knew. Everyone along the river had heard the name Calder. He owned warehouses and barges and a great square house up on the heights. He gave to the right charities and was photographed shaking the right hands, and there were stories about him the way there always are about men who get very rich very fast in a trade where it is easy to hide things in the holds of boats. But stories are not evidence, and Calder had never once stood in a dock, because the men who could have put him there had a way of changing their minds, leaving the city, or simply ceasing to be found. Peter Vane had found a second set of accounts, money that came in from cargoes that did not exist and went out to men whose names were written nowhere a taxman could read them, and had been foolish enough, or brave enough, to say so to Calder's face, and to ask for money to forget it. That was the meeting on the river steps. Calder brought the money, and a different plan than the one Vane had agreed to, which was why the true ledger had gone into the river in 2 halves and Vane had gone down against the iron rail. So there it was, a frightened bookkeeper, a powerful man, a beating in the dark, and one witness in a red tunic who had seen it all and would stand up in a magistrate's court and say so. A king's guard's word in a court of the realm is not a small thing. It is given by a man whose whole life is a discipline of telling the truth and standing where he is told to stand. But Aldous Calder did not get to be Aldous Calder by letting things be simple. And so, 4 days later, on a bright cold morning with the tourists 3 deep at the rail, his lawyer came to the Westmark gate and tried to buy the one thing in this affair that was not for sale. The lawyer's name was Sebastian Crail. He had a card he did not bother to offer us, because men like Crail do not hand cards to corporals. He stood at the rail in the cold sunlight with his unhurried smile and his envelope, and the tourists nearest us, who had come to film a soldier standing still, lowered their phones and went quiet, sensing that something more interesting than stillness was about to happen. "Take it to the lodge office," I said again, "last time." "I will speak to the guardsman," Crail said, and his eyes went back to Tomas, who had not moved and would not move. "He need not answer me. He need only listen and be sensible. There are 2 roads out of this, Guardsman Farron. On the first, you remember the river steps were dark, and you were tired, and you could not truly be sure of faces or words, and the envelope on this rail is yours, and a second follows when the matter is closed, and you stand your post in peace for as many years as you please." He paused, and the smile thinned by the smallest degree. "On the second, you insist on a version of events that cannot be proven against a man with resources, and you discover that a guardsman's career is a delicate thing, that men can be transferred to cold and lonely posts, complaints made, a quiet word due to a man in 19 years of good service what no enemy ever managed. My client would regret the second road. He would regret it for you." So there it was, laid out clean, the bribe and then the threat. Buy him, and if he will not be bought, break him. It had worked before, I had no doubt, on dockworkers and bookkeepers and frightened clerks with futures to lose. Crail said it with the bored confidence of a tool that has always done its job. And Tomas Farron stood there and let it wash over him like weather, and gave no more sign of having heard it than the stone wall behind him. The easy thing to write is that nothing showed on his face, and that is true, but it is not the whole truth. What I read while Crail talked was not blankness. It was the held stillness of a man holding a great deal, the heat of the insult, the contempt of being priced like a horse, and the memory of the small bleeding man against the iron rail, and what it would mean to him if the only witness decided he had not, after all, seen anything. The discipline is not that he feels nothing. It is that when everything in him wants to answer, the part that decides is still in command. What Tomas chose to answer with was nothing, because nothing was the truest answer a man could give to Sebastian Crail. The truth did not require him to be loud, only to be unmoved, and to say it later in the one place where it would count. Crail waited. The envelope sat on the rail. A tourist's phone somewhere to my left was filming all of it, and I was glad of it, because 100 phones at the Westmark rail had convicted 100 fools before this one, and I had begun to hope they might convict one more. "He has heard you," I said, "and you have had your answer. Step back from the rail." For the first time something flickered behind Crail's smooth front, not anger, but the adjustment of a man who has played a strong hand and found it did not take the trick. He looked at Tomas a moment longer, the way a man looks at a door he is surprised to find still locked. Then he picked up the envelope, unhurried, and slid it back inside his coat, and the unhurriedness was the worst thing about him, because it told me he was not finished, that this had only been the first and cheapest of his roads, and the second was already being walked somewhere out of our sight. "Think on it, guardsman," he said, almost kindly, as though doing Tomas a favor. "The hearing is Friday. A great many things can be reconsidered before Friday." And he turned and went out the visitor's gate with the same smooth ease he had come in by, and the tourists let out a breath and lifted their phones again, and Tomas stood his post as though no man had spoken to him at all. When the change came and the watch-room door was shut behind us, I turned to him. "You know what he is." "I know what he is," Tomas said. He set his rifle in the rack and took off the bearskin, and for a moment out of the uniform spell, he was only a tired man of 50 in a serge tunic. A man who has never met a thing he could not buy or break. The whole trick of a man like that is that he has been right so often he has stopped believing there is any other kind of man in the world. His gray eyes were perfectly steady. He is wrong, that is all. Friday he will find out, and he will not understand it, because a man like that never does. "He can do what he says," I said. "The transfer, the complaint, the quiet word, he has the reach." "He has the reach," Tomas agreed. He did not sound afraid, nor brave in the loud way men are when they perform it. He sounded like a man stating the weather. "And I have the truth and the watch and 19 years of standing where I was told. We will find out Friday which is heavier." He hung the bearskin on its peg. "I saw what I saw, Dev. He can make my life hard. He cannot make me not have seen it." I was afraid for my friend that afternoon, and ashamed of my fear, because he was not afraid at all. The trouble began before nightfall, exactly as Crail had promised, and it came down the chain of command the way a heavy stone comes down a stair, landing on each step in turn, and the men on each step deciding what kind of men they were. The first stone was a transfer order, a printed form with the right stamps in the right corners, requiring Guardsman Farron to remove forthwith to the Hollowmere relief, a wet, lonely tower post 2 days' march up the coast where men were sent to be forgotten, effective the following morning, the day before the hearing. There was no name on it but the duty offices. There never is, on a thing like that. The reach of a man like Calder does not come with a return address. It comes as a form that appeared overnight, perfectly correct, signed by men who could swear truthfully they did not know why they signed it. Sergeant Owen Hask read the form twice and carried it to the watchroom, where Tomas and I were cleaning kit. Hask was a broad, slow, careful man, 3 years from his pension, the kind of sergeant who had buried a temper somewhere deep in his youth and built 30 years of patience over the grave of it. "This came down at 4, he said. "No requisition behind it. No relief been asked for at Hollowmere. The post's had one man on it since spring, and he's not due rotating till autumn. Somebody wants you up a wet tower the day before you're due in a magistrate's court, Farron, and wants it to look like the duty roster did it. You know anything about that?" "I know exactly about that," Tomas said, and told him plainly, in order, the river steps and the money and the books in the water and the small man against the rail, and the lawyer at the gate with his envelope and his 2 roads. Hask listened without expression, turning the form slowly with one thick finger. "Right," he said, "and then, you'll not be going to Hollowmere." "Sergeant, the form's correct," I said. "It's stamped. If he doesn't go, that's a man refusing a posting the day before. They'll say he dodged duty, stand him down, and then his word in court's worth nothing because he's a guardsman under a charge." "I know what it's worth," Hask said. 30 years I've watched men with money try to fold the army into a shape that suits them, and the trick's always the same: make the right thing look like the wrong thing. So a good man either breaks the rule or breaks himself on it. But there's a thing the Crails of the world forget. They think the rule's just paper, and whoever holds the most paper wins. They forget a rule's only as strong as the men who decide to mean it. He folded the form once and put it in his breast pocket. This came down without a requisition. That makes it irregular, and an irregular order I'm within my rights to query before I action it, up the proper channel, in writing, by the book, and the book moves slow enough that no man's getting marched to Hollowmere before Friday over a form I've got honest questions about. I've 40 more years of paper in this head than that lawyer, and I know which forms you can sit on. This one I can. So I will. A broad, slow sergeant 3 years from his pension had just decided to stand between my friend and one of the most powerful men on the river, with nothing in hand but a folded form and 30 years of knowing the rules better than the men abusing them. He did not call it courage. He called it querying an irregular order, and that was exactly why it would hold. The second stone came the next morning, heavier, and landed higher up the stair. It was a written complaint, lodged through a solicitor's office, alleging that guardsman Tomas Farron had assaulted a man on the river steps and was in the habit of fabricating accounts to inflate his own importance. It named Peter Vane as the victim, and carried, attached, a signed statement in Vane's name swearing the guardsman had come at him out of the dark and struck him down, with no other man present at all. I read it standing in the lodge office and felt the floor tilt, because it was so clever it made me sick. They had taken the true thing, a soldier, a beaten man, a witness, and turned it inside out, made the witness the attacker and the victim the liar's tool, with the victim's own signature on it. They had got to Peter Vane. Of course they had a frightened bookkeeper with no money and no friends against a man who owned half the wharves. And the difference between the two men is the whole difference this story turns on. One had a thing that was not for sale. The other did not, and had never had the chance to find out he might. "They've made him a defendant," said the officer of the watch when she had read it. "If they can get Farron charged with the assault, his evidence at Calder's hearing collapses, a man under his own charge, accusing the man whose hearing put him there. The court won't weigh a word he says. It's not a defense. It's a counterattack, and a good one, the best I've seen in years, and I have seen a great many." Her name was Captain Imogen Rain, and she commanded the Westmark watch. Not a large person nor a loud one, but she went very still and very precise when a thing mattered. Lean and exact, with a soldier's economy and a lawyer's clarity, she had risen to her command past men who did not want a woman over them by the simple, unanswerable method of being right more often than they were. She read the complaint a second time, then looked up at Tomas, who had stood at attention through all of it without a word. "Did you strike Peter Vane?" she asked, not unkindly, but flat, the way you ask a thing you must have the true answer to. "No, ma'am," Tomas said. "I came off the wall when Calder struck him. I called out. Calder ran. I knelt to Vane and saw to his head and blew 3 on the whistle for the watch." Corporal Marsh and the section were with me inside 2 minutes, and the surgeon dressed the wound, and it is all in the nightbook in the surgeon's hand and mine. It is, I said. I wrote it. Time, names, the wound, all of it that night before any of us knew it would matter. Captain Rain nodded slowly, and something settled in her face, not relief, but the look of a soldier who finds the ground firmer underfoot than the enemy hoped. Then they have made a mistake, she said quietly. They built their counterattack on a lie they could not check, because they did not know the watch keeps an honest book the same night, every night in 2 hands, a book that cannot be revised 4 days later in a solicitor's office. They have sworn Vane was struck out of the dark with no one else present. We have a record of 3 whistle blasts, a section turning out, a surgeon's dressing, and the name of the man who ran. A lie is only strong until it meets a fact it did not know was there, and this one is about to meet several. What she did next has no metal in it, and is the part that actually wins. She did not make a speech or call the newspapers. She did the slow, unglamorous work of getting the facts in the right order and putting them where they could not be ignored. First she sent for the surgeon, Mr. Halloran, and had him write out, dated and signed, a full account of the wound, its nature, the injury at the back and side of the head, consistent with a blow against an iron rail, not at all with a man knocked down face to face from in front. The lie had Tomas striking Vane down out of the dark. The wound said Vane had gone backward into the rail, exactly as Tomas described. The body had kept the true account in its own flesh, and no solicitor's statement could revise it. Then she had me and the 2 section men each write our own accounts, separately in different rooms, before we could compare notes. Because, she said, 3 honest accounts written apart agree on the bones and differ in the small details, and that very pattern is the fingerprint of truth, where a manufactured story is always too smooth. Ours agreed on the bones and differed, charmingly and uselessly, on whether the lamp had been lit or guttering, on which of us reached Vane first, on the exact words Tomas had said. Captain Rain laid them beside the nightbook and the surgeon's note and let herself, for the first time since the complaint arrived, very slightly smile. That, she said, is what the truth looks like when you write it down before you need it. Crail built his case in 4 days in a quiet office with 1 frightened man and a pen. We built ours that Thursday night in the cold without knowing we were building anything, because that is how the watch keeps its book. You cannot bribe a nightbook, threaten a wound, or transfer a surgeon's dated note to a wet tower up the coast. His power is the power to reach people, and he has run his case into the one part of this affair with no people left to reach. But there was a person left to reach. Whatever Tomas's truth was worth in court, it would go harder with the victim himself swearing the lie. And more than that, the thing that troubled me into the small hours, Peter Vane was in danger. A man who had signed a false statement for Calder now knew exactly how Calder worked, a loose thread he would not want left hanging once the hearing was done. I said as much to Captain Rain. She had already thought of it. He is the only living witness besides Farron to that night, and the one Calder thinks he owns. He is also a man in a great deal of fear, and frightened men can sometimes be brought back to the truth if they are shown there is a road back and someone to walk it with them. I am going to find him, not to threaten, not to bargain, to tell him that if he tells the truth there will be men around him while he does and after. That is a thing Calder has never been able to offer anyone. He can offer money and fear. He cannot offer protection because the only protection he sells is from himself. She took up her cap. We can, so we will. The 3rd stone did not come down the chain of command at all. It came that same night through the window of Tomas's lodging, a stone with a paper round it, the crudest language a powerful man's reach can speak when its smooth lawyers have failed. The paper said, in block letters, that a man with a long memory and a short temper would find himself with neither, and that there were rivers in this city that had taken better men than a guardsman who did not know when to be sensible. It was meant to reach into the one place the smooth roads could not, a man's fear for his own life. Tomas brought it to the watch room himself at first light, his hand steady as he smoothed the paper flat. He has come to the bottom of his bag, he said. A man only throws stones through windows when he has run out of envelopes and forms. This is not strength, Dev. It is a man finding his strength does not work on this thing and not knowing what to do but hit it harder. What frightens me is not the river. It is that this works so often he expects it to. He does not even write it well. He does not need to. It has always been enough. He pushed the paper toward me. Log it. And then we go to work because there is a hearing Friday and a small frightened man somewhere in this city who has been told there is no road back, and we are going to be the proof that there is one. I logged it. My own hands were not as steady as his. There is a particular cold that comes off a threat to a friend's life thrown through his window in the dark, and it got into me that morning. What steadied me was Tomas, not his courage, but his clarity. He had named the river out loud, and he had decided long ago what he would not let any man take from him. A stone through a window did not reopen the question, because the question was already answered. Captain Rain found Petter Vane on the Wednesday in a cheap room above a chandler's shop near the wharves. She did not take a squad, only me, in plain clothes and Sergeant Hask. She went up the narrow stair and knocked, and when the door opened a crack on a chain and a frightened eye, she did not put her boot to it. She stood back where he could see all of her, hands plain at her sides. Mr. Vane, my name is Imogen Rain. I command the watch at Westmark. We are not here to make you do anything. We are here to tell you something true, and then we will leave if you ask us to. The chain did not come off, but the door did not shut, and Captain Rain took that for the small permission it was and went on, the way you talk to a man on a ledge. We know what happened on the river steps. We know Aldous Calder struck you, and that our guardsman came off the wall and stopped it, and that you owe him the dressing on your head, and very likely the fact you are standing behind that door at all. And we know, she said, softer, that someone came to you afterward and frightened you and put a paper and a pen in front of you, and you signed, because you are one man with no money against a man who owns the river. I am not here to be angry with you for it. A man in fear, with no one behind him, does what he must to live. I am here to tell you there is, now, someone behind you, men who will stand around you while you tell the truth, and after and will not stop when the hearing ends, because we do not leave a man we have asked to be brave. There was a long silence. Then a small, cracked voice said, he said no one would believe a bookkeeper over him. He said the soldier would take the money like everyone takes the money, and then it would be my word, a thief's word, against the two of them, and I would go to prison or the river. A breath. He said the soldier had already agreed. The soldier did not take the money, Captain Rain said. He threw the envelope back without so much as looking at it, and last night that man put a stone through his window, which is what powerful men do when they meet something they cannot buy. He did not buy you either. He only frightened you, and fear is a thing you can come back from. The money is not. You have a choice no one can take from you, the same the soldier has. You can let that paper stand and live the rest of your life, as the man who swore an innocent man beat him in the dark. Or you can tell the truth, with men standing around you, and be the man who told it when it was very hard. I cannot make that choice for you. It is the one thing in this whole affair that is wholly yours. The chain came off. The door opened, and the small, frightened bookkeeper stood there gray-faced and shaking. If I tell the truth, will the soldier know it was me who signed against him? Will he hate me? I do not think any place I have stood was quieter than that stairwell while we waited for the captain's answer. He knows already that you signed. He knew within the hour, and do you know what he said? That you were a frightened man who had done a frightened thing, and that frightened men can be brought back. Not one hard word against you. The soldier is not your enemy. He is the only man in this city, besides the three of us on this stair, who has refused to let Calder have you. You will not have to fear his hate. You will have to bear his help, which is harder because you must believe you deserve it. She put out her hand, plain and open. Come and tell the truth, Petter. We have you. He came. He came down the narrow stair into the gray afternoon, and we did not march him and did not crowd him, Hask on one side and I on the other, not as guards but as men. We took him not to a cell but to the lodge, to a warm room with tea and a fire, and he told it all again the true way, a clerk writing it down with the surgeon's note and the night-book beside him as the ground he could stand on. When he had signed, he asked, very low, whether he might tell the soldier himself that he was sorry, and Captain Rain said he might after Friday, when it would mean what it ought to and not look like a thing arranged. So that is how the matter stood on the Thursday night, 1 week to the day from the river steps. A bribe refused, a transfer sat upon, a counter-complaint built on a lie that had met the watch's record, a threat logged, and a frightened witness brought back to the truth by the one thing Calder had never had to sell, a room full of people who would stand around a man while he was brave and not leave when it was done. The reach of the powerful had spent itself, road by road, against a thing it did not understand, and on Friday morning the whole of it would come into one room to be weighed. I did not sleep much that night. None of us did, except perhaps Tomas, who slept like a stone, because a man who has settled in advance what he will not do has nothing left to lie awake over. The hearing was held in the magistrate's court on Sessions Lane, a high cold room with tall windows and dark benches worn smooth by 2 centuries of people waiting to learn what would be done to them. Aldous Calder came in like a man arriving at a club, big through the shoulders, expensively dressed, wearing the ease of a man who has stood in many rooms where things might have gone badly and watched them go well instead. Sebastian Crail sat at his side, smooth and gray, with a folder of papers he did not appear to think he would need. They had the air of 2 men who had already won and come only to watch the formality of it. Tomas came in last, in full dress, bearskin under his arm and white gloves spotless and medals in a quiet row, and took the witness stand with the same steadiness with which he took his post each dawn. He did not look at Calder, nor at Crail, nor at the small frightened man near the front. He looked at the magistrate, because a king's guard speaks to the man whose business it is to hear him. Crail opened, as we knew he would, with the counterattack. He rose and said gravely that the principal witness against his client was himself the subject of a complaint of assault, sworn by the very man he claimed to have helped, that a guardsman who would beat a citizen in the dark and invent a tale to cover it was no witness on whose word a man of standing should be made to stand. He laid the signed statement before the magistrate with the confidence of a man playing the ace he has held all along. And the magistrate, a dry, spare man named Quill, who had sat that bench 30 years and had, I think, seen rather more of the Crails of the world than Crail supposed, took the statement, read it, set it down, and said, "I have before me also, Mr. Crail, a complaint from the watch that this statement was procured by intimidation, and a second from the same Mr. Vane, given freely and witnessed, retracting it in full. I have the watch's night-book in 2 contemporaneous hands, the surgeon's dated note as to the wound, 3 separate accounts from the men who answered the whistle, and this morning, physical evidence recovered from the river below the steps at low tide." He looked over his spectacles. "So before you build very much more upon Mr. Vane's first statement, you may wish to know I am already in possession of the reasons it is worth nothing." I watched Crail's smooth front go still, not break. Men like Crail do not break in public, but the stillness of a man recalculating fast and not liking the sum. And I watched Calder, who did break for just a moment, a flicker of pure animal surprise crossing his big handsome face, because he had spent 4 days and a great deal of money making certain there was nothing left to find, and a man like that does not expect the river to give anything back. But the river had. That was Captain Rain's last quiet stroke, told to no one but Hask in case it came to nothing. She had reasoned that weighted, folded paper, torn and dropped in a slow river by a stone embankment, can lodge in the silt below a flight of steps rather than wash away, and she had sent 2 strong swimmers of the watch down at the dawn low tide on Thursday. They had brought up from the mud under the iron rail a sodden leather folder, and inside it, swollen and stained but legible once the court clerk had dried and pressed each leaf, the torn halves of Aldous Calder's true accounts. The second set of books, the whole of the thing Peter Vane had been beaten for finding, recovered not from a witness who could be bought or frightened, but from the riverbed which cannot be bribed. The crime had thrown its own proof into the water in front of the one witness who would remember exactly where, and the water had kept it. It was, in the end, that simple and that hard. Peter Vane took the stand and told the truth, shaking, with the men of the watch in a plain row behind him, so he could feel them at his back, and his account agreed with Tomas's and the night book and the surgeon's note and the swollen ledger drying on the clerk's table, agreed on the bones, differed only in the small human places where true accounts always differ. And Tomas told his last plainly, and when Crail rose to cross-examine and tried smoothly, to suggest the night was dark and the witness tired and the faces uncertain, Tomas answered in the level voice of a man stating the weather. "It was a clear night with a half-moon, sir, and the lamp at the steps lights a face within 10 yards, and I was 4 hours into a relief I have stood 1,000 times, which is not tired, it is simply Thursday. I saw the money. I heard the figure and the names. I saw the books torn and dropped. I saw Mr. Calder strike Mr. Vane against the rail. I have said so every time I have been asked the same way because it is what happened, and what happened does not change to suit the asking." And then he said the thing I have never forgotten, the thing I believe ended it before the verdict made it official. Crail had asked, with the last edge of his last card, whether he was quite certain his memory had not been, he chose the word carefully, encouraged, by the watch or anyone. And Tomas looked at him, for the first time directly. "Sir, a man came to my gate last week and offered me money to remember it differently, and when I would not, threats. I refused the money and I logged the threats. You may ask why a man would do that, refuse the easy road and take the hard one, for a stranger he met bleeding on a step in the dark. Because the one thing no man can buy from me and no man can frighten out of me is the thing I actually saw. He can make my life hard. He has tried. He cannot make me not have seen it because it has already happened, and the truth is not a thing I own and may sell. It is a thing I keep. That is the whole of my evidence, and it is enough." The room was very quiet when he finished. Nobody in that high, cold room moved, and the magistrate Quill sat looking at my friend a long moment with an expression I can only call recognition, as though across 30 years of that bench he had been waiting to see exactly one thing and had finally seen it. Aldous Calder was convicted. Not that day, the law grinds slow, but the morning of Tomas's evidence was the morning it became certain, and every man in that room knew it. He went down on the recovered books, the bookkeeper's restored testimony, and the watch's record. His lawyer's counterattack collapsed into the lie it had always been, and the threats that came to light, the transfer with no requisition, the complaint procured by fear, the stone through the window, did not help his standing with the bench by the smallest degree. He was convicted of fraud and the assault, and in time, the attempt to pervert the course of justice, and the great square house on the heights was sold to pay what was owed. To the last he looked at my friend as at a malfunction, a thing that ought to have worked and inexplicably had not. The system did not forget Tomas afterward, and that is the part the powerful never expect. The Hollowmere transfer was withdrawn, and the duty office quietly turned over to find how a posting with no requisition had come to be stamped at all, an inquiry that, I am told, made several comfortable men in the back offices considerably less comfortable. The lodge stood by every man who had stood by Tomas, Hask, who had sat on a corrupt form, the surgeon who had kept an honest note, the swimmers who had gone down into the cold river at dawn, me, who had only logged the truth as it happened. None of us was a hero, and that is the point. We were a watch. A man alone refusing a bribe is a brave man who can be reached. A man inside a watch that will not be bought, holding the truth until the institution catches up to back him, is a thing the Calders of the world have no answer for. Petter Vane came to the Westmark gate himself, a fortnight after the last sitting, in a clean coat and less grey in the face. I brought Tomas off relief for it, because some things are worth a minute of an empty post. The small man stood at the rail where Crail had stood, no envelope this time, only his two empty hands, and said he had come to say he was sorry, for the statement, for the lie, for the fear that had made him sign. And Tomas, who almost never broke his post for anything, turned his head and looked the man full in the face. You came back. That is the whole of it that matters. A great many men do not. You signed a frightened thing and then stood up in a cold room and unsigned it in front of the man you were afraid of, which is harder than never signing at all. There is nothing to forgive. You did the brave thing in the end, and the end is where it counts. And he faced front again, and Petter Vane went away down the forecourt walking, I thought, a little straighter than he had come. I have stood many years beside Tomas Farron and seen him refuse fools and fend off the arrogant and protect the small, but the morning I think of most is still the first one, the gray suit at the rail, the envelope, the smooth voice offering 2 roads. That was the morning I understood what the discipline is actually for. It is not for standing still. Any post will teach a man that. It is for the moment a powerful man lays money on the rail, then a threat beside it, and waits, certain, for the easy road to win as it has won for him 100 times before. The whole of a guardsman's training comes down to having, in that moment, one true thing in your keeping that no money can lift and no fear can move. They could buy the duty office and frighten the bookkeeper and threaten the man and throw the books in the river. There was one thing they could not buy, and they ran the whole of their power against it and broke, because it had already happened and the world does not run backward for any man's purse. He saw what he saw, and a watch stood behind it until the truth was safe.